raising of Lazarus. We left off at verse 20, according to my notes. Gospel of John, the 11th chapter, verse 20. John, in the first 12 chapters, first half of the book, presents for us 7 major signs, and this is the big one. He's been building up to this one. Okay, just to set the stage, where is this miracle taking place? What region?
Judea.
Judea. And so to go back to Judea, how'd the disciples look on that? Yeah. Yeah, let's go back and die with them. Yeah, it's kind of, they knew the death threats, they knew the persecution, they knew the opposition in Judea, and yet they're going back with them anyway. And by the way, this is at the end of Jesus' ministry. Remember, even though we're just halfway through the Gospel of John, we're not quite halfway through the Gospel of John, but from here on out, after chapter 12, it's just 1 week. Just 1 week. And most of that, a third of the book's going to be one night. So anyway, so Jesus is coming back to Judea. He delays, though. And how long does he delay? How long has Lazarus been in the grave?
4 days.
4 days. He delayed 2 days, so to come back, he had been dead 4 days in the grave. Okay. By the way, is there any significance to that? Him being in the grave for 4 days?
Sort of like him, wasn't it?
Excuse me?
Like Jesus?
Yeah. This broke the record. Jesus was 3 days. So this would be 4 days. Have you heard any commentators sometimes will say that Jews believed that the soul left the body on the 3rd day. You don't find that in Scripture, but that's a lot of commentators will make that reference, and so it's kind of like Jesus waited an extra day beyond the shadow of a doubt. You know, I'm thinking you wait an extra hour when somebody's dead, but here he waits 4 days. So when he comes, the first sister, Lazarus has 2 sisters. What are their names?
Mary and Martha.
Mary and Martha. And the first sister to come out to meet Jesus is, it's Martha in verse 20. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. So he's going to have this interaction with Martha first, and then after that, Mary. I'm very thankful for that, because 2 personality types, right? We already described this. Can somebody summarize for me the difference between Mary and Martha?
One was quiet, one was outgoing.
Okay, one more outgoing, one quiet. Which one would tend to be the one that would be more concerned about details and preparations and working hard? And
Martha.
Yeah, Martha. And while Martha's doing all the preparations for the meal, for example, and preparing for Jesus, where's Mary?
Sitting at his feet.
Yeah, she wants to get the lesson. Difference in personalities, and there's going to be a difference in the way Jesus deals with these 2 sisters at a time of loss. Is there a take-home for us? I think so. Maybe at more than one level, but let's take it at this level first. Is there a take-home for us? You know what I mean by that? Is there something that we can learn for the way we deal with situations right now at time of loss?
Yes.
Time of grief. What would that be?
Well, some people are going to be more detached or seem like they don't care, but they really do, as opposed to somebody that very emotional, very, yeah, I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
Yeah, I'm just going to assume at one level or another, maybe some people have been much closer to it than others, but everybody's been to a funeral, right? Everybody's had family members or close friends involved in this. Have you ever been surprised at the way somebody handled grief? Boy, I have. I've been downright shocked sometimes, and I just have to remind myself that not everybody handles this the same way, right? Some people, it seems like, well, this doesn't bother you at all, and that's very unfair, because maybe they just don't show it like everybody else does. Anyway, maybe I'm spending too much time on this, but let me just throw one more thing out. one of the observations, somebody pointed out to me a long time ago, I told you 1 year at Bible college I was working at a funeral home, right? I've told you that before. And it was very beneficial for me just to see different people in that kind of setting. And one of the points that somebody made to me early on that I think I can verify this from my limited experience, but just take it for that. No proof beyond that. But one of the points they made was the people who tend to bottle up more, sooner or later it's going to have to come out. And so it's usually those kind of people that much longer are dealing with the grieving process. Other people who tend to be very, whoa, it's all out on the table and everything, they tend to, I hate to use the word get over it, that's not an appropriate way of saying it, but they tend to grapple. They tend to deal with the grief sooner than later. I'm so tempted to tell you some stories, and I won't. I'll just leave it at that. Let's just go with these two, because here are two sisters, and obviously different personality types. Martha's one that goes out to meet Jesus. Verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. What does that tell us about Martha?
Faithful.
Okay, faithful in is this a good kind of faith?
It's a statement of her faith.
Yeah, she knows that Jesus performed miracles, and if he would have been there, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Depending on who said this could be a put down, couldn't it? This could be and why weren't you here? Didn't Jesus delay in coming back? Didn't they send news earlier? In fact, when the news came to Jesus, was it that Lazarus had died? No, what was the original news?
Sick.
Yeah, the one that you love, your dear friend is sick. And so, is this an affirmation of faith? I think so. Is this maybe a mild, I don't want to say put down, complaint? Maybe a complaint? If you would have been here,
It's a small rebuke.
maybe. I think that's fair to say. By the way,
Probably came out from her grief.
yeah. Thank you for saying it that way, because do you hold people 100% accountable for what they say at a time like this?
No.
I hope not. I hope not. Especially when somebody loses a family member. Okay, verse 22, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. What does that sound like?
A little bit of a plea.
Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Well, her brother's dead. Does this sound like she thinks that?
Do it for once.
Okay, if this is the only verse we had, I would be thinking, wow, maybe I ought to reread that previous verse where she said, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Maybe that's not a complaint. Maybe that's just an affirmation of, you could have healed him, and even now, you can still take care of him. Okay, I might come to that conclusion if these were the only verses we had. But these aren't the only verses we have. And Martha, a little bit later on, when Jesus comes to the tomb and says to remove the stone, Martha's the one's going to speak up. And what's she going to say? Yeah, the body stinks. Are you sure you want to pull the stone away? Okay, by the way, the context there, because if you're thinking, well, why else would they pull the stone away? Again, I'm counting on the fact that maybe you've got some personal experience, or you know family members. When a family member comes in late for a funeral, you know what typically a funeral home will do? Let everybody go out, and they'll come in and they'll open the casket again. Why do they do that? Did you know they did that? If somebody's late, if a family member's late, and even the viewing's over and everything, they typically go in and open up the casket so the person who wasn't there earlier, why do they do that?
Or even in a closed casket, they'll allow the family, if you wanted to see them, see what was a closed casket.
Right, and most funeral directors will use the expression, allow the person to say their goodbyes. It's probably going to mean something different for different people. But why would he have the stone be rolled away? Well, that's probably one of the best explanations that people thought, because most people were not thinking he's going to call Lazarus out of the tomb. but probably wanted to see the dead body, is probably what a lot of people are thinking. Well, Martha's statement is, it's too late to see the dead body. Okay, so I'm getting way ahead of myself, but it affects the way we look at what she says right here. If she does not mean that you're going to raise Lazarus, am I making sense here? It doesn't seem like she really thinks Jesus is going to raise Lazarus, because later on she objects to them rolling the stone away, right? Well, if she doesn't think they're going to raise Lazarus, then what does this mean when she says this?
She's hoping he'll bring her into heaven, or
Okay, bring him into heaven. Still focused on Lazarus. Are there any other possibilities of what this might mean?
Crickets.
I don't know. I don't think it means that she thinks he's going to raise her brother from the dead. And I don't think that because of what happens later on. So I come back to this verse and I ask myself the question, what could it mean? Maybe it could mean Lazarus is going to be taken care of even though he's died, because there's a life after death. Maybe it could mean even now, we know that whatever you ask God, God will give you. Maybe there'll be a peace and a comfort, and you can bring comfort to us like nobody else can. Maybe she's focused on them. A lot of possibilities. I just don't think the possibility of a resurrection is on the table because of what happens later, in her mind. Does that make sense? Okay. By the way, sometimes people say words and you say, what did you mean by that? And they respond by saying, I have no idea what I meant. I just said it. And that could be a possibility here too. Jesus said to her, verse 23, your brother will rise again. Okay. Jesus has talked about the resurrection before. The Jews believed in a general resurrection. Martha said to him in verse 24, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Talking about the general resurrection. John chapter 5, verses 28, 29, Jesus talks about that. About everyone will rise from them. And the reason I bring that reference up again is a lot of people forget, it's not just the righteous. Both the righteous and the wicked will be resurrected on the last day. It's just, so everybody gets resurrected. It's terribly different for everybody who gets resurrected. But everybody gets resurrected. By the way, does everybody get a resurrection body? Did I ask that right?
Don't they?
In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it says, this mortal must put on immortality, perishable, must be swallowed up by imperishable. And so it talks about the fact that we will, when we're resurrected, our souls will be reunited with a imperishable body, one that lasts forever. Is that just for Christians?
No.
No, everybody gets some sort of, it's not a physical body, but everybody gets reunited with a resurrected body. Are they eternal bodies? Yes. Both for us in heaven as well as those who will exist in hell will be in some sort of, they will be reunited with a everlasting body of some sort. So I think that's should be taken with a great deal of seriousness. There is a resurrection on the last day. But Jesus answers her in verse 25. Jesus said to her, I am. I am. Notice that expression again. By the way, after class, one of our discussions, did anybody else ever use this expression, I am? Yes, and you could use this in everyday life. You could say, I am, and not be saying God's name. It's the way Jesus used this expression repeatedly and associating it with the fact that he's equal with God. Gives it extra gravity. So every time we look at this expression, we think about that. And Jesus said again, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. How do you live if you die? Yes, there is, which by the way, it is a spiritual life after death, but there's also going to be a body after the resurrection. There is a life that goes beyond death. And everybody's going to exist beyond death, but some people are really going to live, Zoe, experience the kind of existence that God intended for them to. Other people are going to have experienced the exact opposite. But Jesus says, I'm the source of life. Everyone who believes in me will live even if he dies. Does that imply some people won't die? Yes. Who's not going to die?
Christians.
Well, no, we die.
Physical death.
Okay, but is there anybody who's not going to experience physical death?
Jesus.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, those that are alive during the,
When the Lord returns,
Right.
those who are still alive will be caught up in the air, it says 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, right? Okay. Did anybody else not die physically other than those still around the return of the Lord?
Enoch and Elijah.
Yeah, Elijah and who else?
Enoch.
Yeah, Enoch. Yes, thank you. He walked with the Lord and he was not. Okay, and there are some people that were brought back to life, but they had died. Several in Jesus' ministry. And this is another example. Verse 26, everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Everyone who lives and believes in me. Why is John writing this book?
So we will believe.
Yeah, to really understand what belief is all about. And by the way, is he sweetening the pot here? If you understand what this belief is all about, you have what? Not only life in his name, you will never die. And after he says it, he says, do you believe this? What kind of question is that? But turning to Martha and says, do you believe this? Maybe he's saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Did she understand what he was saying?
probably not.
No, I don't think she understood what he was saying, because she's the one who complains when the stone's going to be moved, right? Which, by the way, did any of his disciples understand everything that he said? No. No, I was listening to a sermon today, doing some other things, and this guy was just really good. And he was dealing with some attacks on Christianity. And one of the attacks on Christianity is that the New Testament, the real Jesus was just a good moral teacher. And it wasn't until Constantine comes along that you get the writings of the New Testament and they make Jesus into this miracle doer and everything that he never was, right? And this guy had just a great response, and just point after point. But one of the points he was making was that part of the reason we know this is authentic is not just the fact that it's a lot older than Constantine. It goes clear back to the very first century, and we've got manuscript evidence for that. But it's not just that, it's the way that it's written. Think about this. If you want to make up a story, and you want to make up a story so you can start a church, and you've got several leaders of the church, and you want everybody to follow this, how are you going to present these people who are going to be leaders of the church? Aren't you going to present them as the kind of people you really want to follow?
Right.
And look at the way the apostles are presented in the New Testament. It's kind of like, if it could be misunderstood, they misunderstood it. Right? And even after Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, a few verses later, Jesus has to turn to him and say, get behind me, Satan. So as far as all the flaws and everything, it's another testimony to the truthfulness of what we've got in Scripture here. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. The Bible honestly tells us that people don't get this, but Jesus is challenging her, right? Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. I know that you're the special one of God. I know that, but she still doesn't get what that means, right? That's part of the reason for Jesus' ministry, is to display what it means for him to be God. Not just through performing the miracles, but through his teaching. Verse 28, When she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here, and he's calling for you. In other words, saying secretly, it's not like this is a big secret, but she didn't just come in and blurt it out so everybody would know, right? Chuck?
Sorry, just back up to the last.
Okay.
I didn't catch your eye. When she says, yes, Lord, I have believed, that sounds like she no longer believes.
No.
Or is that not the...
Yeah, the tense here is the idea that I don't just believe what you said, I'm already a believer.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, again, in the New American Standard, there's probably there's an asterisk there, right? To show that the tense is, frequently they will do this when she said to him in verse 27, they'll do this to show that the way we're going to translate this into English is not the tense in the original Greek, because we wouldn't understand the tense in the original Greek. It would sound too goofy to us, right? So we're doing our best with the English on this. And so that little asterisk shows us that. Okay, she goes and she says secretly, the point, again, I don't think she's trying to keep this quiet from everybody. It's just she didn't come in and just blurt it out to everybody. She didn't make a general announcement, right? She comes into the house where Mary is grieving, and she goes over and just simply tells her sister. She doesn't tell everybody else, right? The teacher is here, and he's calling for you. Verse 29, when she heard this, she got up quickly and was coming to Jesus. So she hears from her sister, Martha. Mary gets up after Martha tells her and goes out to meet Jesus because Jesus is asking for her. After that happened, well, we're going to see other people follow her in just a minute. Verse 30. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. Saying this to explain why Mary's going out, right? Verse 31. Then the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep. Okay, I give kudos here to the Jews who are consoling her, because she's going to go out to weep. They're going to be there with her, right? It says that's their intention. Verse 32, therefore when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Okay, what did Martha say to Jesus when she first met him?
Basically the same thing.
Same thing. Okay. What does this mean? Is this a complaint? An affirmation of faith? Probably somewhere in between, maybe a little bit of a complaint, just like it was with Martha. How did Jesus respond to Martha? He reasons with her. He tries to get her to think about what he's already taught. He challenges her. Do you really trust me? Do you believe this? What does Jesus do with Mary? Doesn't do any of that.
It also could be an indication that they actually talked to each other about that beforehand.
Could be.
Usually,
Could very well be.
people say the exact same thing.
That's very true.
Agreed upon between the two parties beforehand.
And you know what? Sometimes Jesus has taught about this before, but he goes over it again with Martha. And sometimes people are ready and they want to engage in dialogue. Other times people aren't ready for dialogue, especially at a time like this. Sometimes people aren't ready to sit down and let's think this through. No, go ahead and cry for a while. We'll get to the rational process a little bit later. I think that's one of the reasons I think both the sisters are being focused on here. She comes out and she says that to Jesus. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, so that tells us how she said this, right? When he saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, sees all these people crying, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. Okay, he's going to ask where the body is, and then the verse 35 is going to tell us that he wept as well. So everybody's crying. Jesus sees this. He cries with those who cry. By the way, does the Bible ever talk about weeping with those who weep?
Yeah.
Yeah, where does it say that? It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, that we're all different parts of the body, but we're all one body. And after giving several examples about how we need each other, it says we rejoice with those who rejoice and we weep with those who weep. And I love that, because the analogy of a body, if a car runs over your foot, you don't say, oh, it doesn't bother me, it's my foot. No, usually the whole body gets involved in being upset over what happens to the, right? Right? You share in the pain, and you share in the joy. Jesus is going to weep. But there's something very interesting here, and maybe you remember this last time we went through this, but I just find this fascinating. In verse 33, when it says he's deeply moved in spirit, I'm very curious as to a footnote or a translation. Does your translation say something different?
I have a footnote that says angry.
Angry. He was angry. That very well could be. The literal Greek here says, or the word that's being used here means in the Greek, snort of a horse. Sorry, that's what it means. I don't know horses that well, but in the movies I've seen, if a horse snorts, get out of the way. Did you guys see this guy who tried to pet the horse on the beach last week? Did you see that? Did you see that? They've got a big sign, don't, you know, every time you go to the zoo, they've got these signs, don't feed the animal, don't touch. They've got these big signs on the beach. Where is this beach? It's up north, right?
That's Tequila, Maryland. It's wild horses.
Yeah.
Okay, wild horses. And they got signs all over the place. Don't pet the horses. So the tourist goes up and pets the horse.
Just kicked him right in the crotch.
Yeah, and the horse kicked him. And they caught it all on film.
Well, I don't think it was from the United States, though.
Okay.
It's one of those funny things.
I've seen enough of those videos, though, that horses, if a horse is mad, I'm going to stay away from the horse. Right? They're fast, they can kick, they're powerful
They
beings.
capture them every year. They actually sell them. They actually, they usually 200 to 300 of the ponies.
Okay.
And they sell them off. They all come off for charity.
Ah.
People buy them, but then there's so many of them.
Okay. Okay. Well, again, there's a lot I don't know about horses, but it says, when you look this up, the snort of a horse, it was used, I mean, think about this. This is back before cars, long before cars, transportation. People knew horses well back then, right? And they would know an expression like this means, you know, have you ever seen the old cartoons? The cartoons where they show the coming out of somebody's nose? You know, it's kind of like, oh, stand back. I think that's what's trying to, that expression conveys here. So let's read these verses again. He saw her weeping, he saw the Jews also weeping. And what does your translation say, Phil?
It says that he was deeply moved in spirit, but I have my own footnote for angry.
Yeah. He was upset, bothered. It's usually associated with anger. But it's very much a strong emotional response. Right? And was troubled. Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. He wept. Okay. He's brought to tears, obviously concerned about the family. Concerned about what he sees, but also seems to be teaching us he's also upset about what he sees. What would upset Jesus so much?
Satan's temporary victory over death.
Yeah. Sin has brought a lot of bad things in the world that ought to grieve us. I really do think this is an example of that. Remember the Bible says, be angry and do not sin. It's not always a sin to be angry. Some things ought to bother us. And to me, this is a great example, because one of the things that ought to bother us when sin has an effect and messes up what God created. God did not create us to die. Death entered because in the garden, you remember the whole scene, in the day you eat of it, you will surely die. Death did come into the world as a result of sin. Anyway, I think there's a lot to learn from this too. We'll come back to this. Verse 36, the Jews were saying, see how he loved him. So John is going both ways. He's saying, yes, there's obviously expression of compassion. They noted it as love. But John also uses the word, he's bothered. He's really upset by this, what's going on here in Lazarus' death and their loss, at their time of loss. Verse 37, but some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man, wow, that happened quite some time ago, but they're still talking about it because you know what? Nobody causes somebody who was born blind to be able to see. These miracles that Jesus did, they were something not to be forgotten about. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying? Okay, what did both the sisters say when they came? You've been here, you wouldn't die. You've been here, you wouldn't die. What's the crowd saying?
Same thing.
Yeah. Could have prevented this. Okay, in a sense, everybody's tipping their hat to the fact that, wow, could have healed him. But nobody's really saying, oh, watch what he's going to do. Nobody's saying that yet. Right? Couldn't he have kept him from dying? Verse 38, so Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and the stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, this is the verse I made reference to a little bit earlier. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. Okay, I sure don't want to lose the flow of the story, but I do want to make mention of a footnote here. I hadn't thought about this much till I think I told you a couple weeks ago. I'm reading this book that my brother suggested, and it's dealing a lot with smells in the first century. Never thought much about smells in the first century. Did I already tell you this? One of the ways you could tell separation between the classes is how they smell. Only rich people bathed regularly. Working class folks, that was a luxury you couldn't afford and you usually didn't have time for. A typical person, working class person in the first century bathed once a month. I don't know about you, but I'm already holding my nose on the inside. Wow. Okay. There's another reason why I'm bringing this up. Not only what we're going to see next in the 12th chapter is going to open up with Mary anointing Jesus' feet. And it says the fragrance filled the house. This was super expensive perfume. You remember how much it cost? A year's worth of money. That kind of super expensive perfume, the scent probably stayed from that point on, this is the last week, all the way to the cross. Everywhere Jesus went from that moment forward, probably smelled the base of that. Smell was a big thing. When in the marketplace, you go through the, I don't want to be gross. I really don't want to be gross, but there are certain places where you go, and as soon as you walk in, you can smell smells. You can tell.
You know, if they have a cat.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking of, sometimes, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but sometimes smells are very strong in nursing homes. Sometimes, smells are strong in different places. But it tells you something. It tells you people are not well. It tells you people need help. Well, in the first century, smells communicated a lot. And they communicated a difference between the classes. But keep that in the back of your mind, because we're going to see that in the 12th chapter. We're going to come back to the smell. She complains, or she's just saying the stench will be great because he's been dead for 4 days. It is a powerful smell. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Okay, in so many words, yes. He did say that, but why is he bringing it up again? Because he's pointing out to her, you said yes too quickly. You believe, but you don't really believe. It's not enough. Why is John writing this book? To explain what belief's all about. Okay, so we're going to focus in on these things again. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. So they removed the stone. Does that show some belief? I think so. Again, some commentators will point out that a lot of people are probably thinking, okay, he wants to see the body. He wasn't here, so we're going to move the stone so he can see the body, even though it's going to stink. And because he's that close to the family. That's probably, I think that's probably a pretty good explanation of why they're listening to him at this point. Maybe it's simply because, just like the disciples sometimes, they didn't get it, but Jesus said it, we're going to do it. Right? Anyway, they removed the stone, then Jesus raised his eyes, which, by the way, there are many postures for prayer presented to us in the Bible. This is one of the typical ones. Often looking to heaven to pray, and it's just, it's not like God occupies a space up there, because God is spirit, God is everywhere. But it's the idea of having everybody focus on God. He's going to say a very public prayer here. And Jesus does that at different times. In fact, he's going to point out the reason for his prayer in just a minute. He raised his eyes and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe. Yeah, I really want you to have belief. This trusting belief is deeper, stronger, life-changing kind of belief. Believe that you sent me. But okay, I've got to ask the question, is it okay to pray for the benefit of the people around you when you're supposed to be talking to God? Well, isn't that what he just did? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Prayer is communication with God. But public prayer, I think it's very appropriate to keep in mind, why are we here and what are we asking from God or saying to God? So praying on behalf of the people around you, definitely that's what Jesus is doing. And we know that Jesus spent a lot of time in prayer. How do we know that Jesus spent a lot of time in prayer?
Because it told him.
Somebody fell asleep while I was praying.
Many are the occasions where it says that he went out and spent the entire night in prayer.
When he was in the wilderness, he prayed. He was there for 40 days.
Yes. So there are several examples where he would spend extended period of time away from everyone else, so he could really focus on that communication and communing with God the Father. So yes, very strong prayer life, but he also would pray on behalf of the people who were listening to him. Verse 43, when he had said these things, he cried out in a loud voice. Why the loud voice here?
So everybody hears him.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was making a statement, basically.
Yes, he prayed so everybody can hear him. He's making a statement so everybody can hear him. And he makes a statement with a loud voice, which sometimes just speaking with a loud voice carries some authority. You get people's attention. And very much so he's doing that. And I'll even go with the people who say, well, he's saying it loud enough so Lazarus can hear it. I don't argue with that either. Because Lazarus is going to hear it. But I think there's probably more to it, and it's the authoritative thing for the benefit of everybody. In a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Okay, the come forth, this is interesting to me. I hadn't caught this before, but different translation for come forth.
Coming out.
Come out?
Mine says coming out.
Okay, Merritt Island, he's kind of a old standard guy in some of his commentaries, and he has some interesting insights in the Greek. He said, really, you could translate the Greek by saying, Lazarus, this way, over here. Direction giving, not so much an order as this is the way I want you to come. I found that interesting. Anyway, he calls Lazarus out, and I love it when people say, had to say Lazarus, because if you didn't say Lazarus, everybody would come out. Okay, you know what? John 5, I think, supports that. It really does. It says he's going to hear his voice, and everyone will come back, will be resurrected. But here, he just calls Lazarus. The man who had died, Lazarus, came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings. Probably took him a little time to come out of the grave. It's all bound up. Probably looked like a mummy walking out, right? His face wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. This is so neat because it's double meaning, double layer here. Yeah, they're going to take the cloth off. But you know what? Death has been removed. He's come back to life. Let him go. Verse 45, therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. Okay, that's what he's been focusing on. And many of them are persuaded. This is a good thing. Remember back in chapter 10, Jesus said, even if you don't believe in me, believe in the miracles. Look at this. Think about it. Let it sway you. It's exactly what's happening. We've seen this before, haven't we? Several people see what Jesus did, and you know what? I take it this way. I can't think of any other conclusion. He's got to be from God. Just has to be. Right? And they're being swayed by this. Many saw and believed, but, verse 46, some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Okay, this is juxtaposed. This is one set against the other. Some came to faith, believe, a trusting belief. Others went and told the Pharisees.
And they just went to tell them what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that it's pitted against the two, though, it's kind of like, this is the group who responded the way they should. This is the group who responded the way they shouldn't. And why would they go and tell the Pharisees? Why would they do that?
Because they were out to get them. They were out to kill them.
Yes. Yeah, okay. I do this too much, but let's try it. Let's try to park this thought for just a second. We'll come back to it. Because I want to pursue this. I want to go with the Pharisees. And let me tell you where I want to go so you can help me remember. Okay. Pharisees, we're going to see, without a doubt, they don't question the fact that Lazarus was raised from the dead. They know it. How can you deny something like that? But when they confirm that, they are so mad, they're going to dig their heels in. Now we really have to get rid of Jesus. In fact, not only do we have to get rid of Jesus, now we got to get rid of that. Right? Got to get rid of both of them. How in the world could you come to that sort of conclusion? I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Maybe up to this point we can cut them a little slack and say they just weren't persuaded.
You would think that if he could raise somebody from the dead, he could probably raise himself.
Yeah.
So if you kill him, what are you going to do? If you kill Lazarus, you just raise him again.
Well, you know what?
I guess people get smart.
Everybody believed that after the fact. Didn't think it ahead of time, but after the fact, sure.
If they would kill Lazarus, he would have just raised him again. So what would that prove?
Okay, polarizing here though. Nobody stays neutral. Either you're swayed in one direction or you're driven further away. And these Pharisees are really going to be driven further away. Not just Pharisees, Sadducees with them, the high council. Let's go ahead and read it instead of me just making these comments. And they go back and they tell the Pharisees, verse 47, therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council. Okay, Pharisees and Sadducees are the ones who made up the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, this council. And they were saying, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Oh. Did a lot of people come to believe in him? Not everybody. But did a lot of people come to believe in him?
Yeah.
Did the Romans eventually come and take away their nation and their place?
Yep.
Yeah. Prophetic, whether they realized it or not. Were they trying to prevent this from happening? Yeah. Yeah. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, which, by the way, the high priests changed frequently, but not Caiaphas. He was high priest for like 17, 18 years in a row, which, by the way, originally it wasn't set up that way. You were supposed to be high priest for life, but things had gotten very political in the first century and high turnover. But he was the high priest, and so John, for other people's benefit, is pointing that out, so they know he's like the guy in the Sanhedrin meeting. And he's the one who speaks up. He's the high priest that year, and he says, you know nothing at all. Don't you love that when somebody stands up and says, you guys are all stupid. Sorry. You know nothing at all. Nor did you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people and that the whole nation not perish. He's trying to answer their prophetic statement. They were exactly right. although they were looking at it from a totally different angle, right? They're saying, if we let this go on, everybody's going to follow Jesus, and Rome's going to come, we're going to lose our place, we're going to lose the nation and everything. Well, that's exactly what happened, but not the way they thought, right? But Caiaphas here says to them, no, you guys have it all wrong. Don't you understand? We can avoid this whole thing. All we have to do is just get rid of one guy. Get rid of one guy, we'll save the nation, save our places. Okay, but read the rest of this, what he says here. He says, one man died for the people and the whole nation not perish. He's saying that politically. We'll physically kill this guy, so we save our spot politically, and we keep this nation. He doesn't mean any spiritual implication by the words coming out of his mouth. But, verse 51, now he did not say this on his own initiative, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. He was responding to the Sanhedrin on a political level, saying, you guys don't get it at all. We're going to kill this guy and everything will be taken care of. What he didn't realize is God was going to kill this guy, and the problem of sin was going to be taken care of. A much deeper meaning than what he intended.
Full of prophecy.
Yeah.
And they should have known that.
You're exactly right.
If they had-
These are the very people who should have known.
The Old
But,
Testament.
but when you get yourself all worked up, and remember what they said, we have never been slaves to anybody. Which every Sabbath day we remember that God delivered us from the land of Egypt. But we've never been slaves. When you get yourself worked up emotionally sometimes, but you're right. They should have known, and the prophecies were there, and he's prophesying. Doesn't even realize it. Verse 52, and not only, not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So it's not just one nation, that implies other nations. What would that mean? It means people who are not Jews. By the way, this is the late 1st century. John's writing this much later after this happened, still in the 1st century, but much later. And the gospel message has spread, not to just Jews, but Gentiles. And he's pointing back to the fact that we didn't get it at the time, but God was already making this clear to us. That he was going to die for everyone. Verse 53, so from that day on, they planned together to kill him. That was the plan. We're going to put him to death. Have they been planning to put him to death before?
Sure.
Yes. In fact, even people in the crowd said, isn't this the guy that they're trying to kill? They knew they hated him, but now it's a more, okay, no reservations. Everybody's all in. We're going to do this. By the way, not everybody was all in. Who was on the council who wasn't all in?
Nicodemus.
Yeah, Nicodemus. And Joseph. Yeah. So there were a couple guys that went against the grain, but the leadership and those in control were very focused on this. Verse 54, therefore Jesus no longer continued to walk about publicly amongst the Jews, but he went away from there to the country near the wilderness, to a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Okay, why is Jesus leaving the area? Yeah, same reason he did before. Which, by the way, he didn't mind facing danger, right?
It wasn't his time.
Wasn't his time. Wasn't his time for it. By the way, almost though. It's almost. We're going to have the triumphal entry here in the very next chapter. We're leading right up to that. Now the Passover of the Jews was near. This would be the Passover where we have the Lord's Supper. And so we're approaching that very time. Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem. By the way, why did they say up to Jerusalem?
It's on a hill.
Because it's in the mountains, it's elevation. Yeah, they went up to Jerusalem, which, by the way, what was the prominent mountain in Jerusalem? Sometimes they referred to the city of Jerusalem by the name of this mountain. Zion. I think, well, probably not. He's going to refer to Jerusalem as the daughter of Zion in just a little bit, but because it was a prominent hill there. Anyway, many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. What does it mean to purify yourself? It means if you weren't pure, you had to get pure. What does that mean? Yeah, you couldn't participate in the Passover if you were defiled. And so there's purification process that had to take place, before you could participate. Nobody wants to miss the Passover. So it says, so they were seeking for Jesus and were saying to one another, as they stood in the temple, what do you think? What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all? By the way, the Greek language, there's so many neat things about it. It's difficult and I have a hard time with it. But it's worth pursuing because it's so precise. And one of the really neat things about Greek is when they ask a question like this, they can use two different words. In the English, it looks exactly the same. But depending on what word they use in the Greek language, you know if they intended a positive or negative answer from the question. So they ask a question, and the way we would say it is, you don't think he's really going to come to Jerusalem, do you? That's the way we would say it. But in the Greeks, they just used a different word for the negative. But they could say it both ways. You think he's coming to Jerusalem, don't you? Right? Okay. This one expected the negative. They didn't think he was going to show up. Verse 57. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it, so that they might seize him. Okay, they've done this sort of thing before, but they're just upping their game a little bit. Some people have pointed out, I find this very interesting, but some people have pointed out maybe this is one of the reasons that Judas turned on Jesus, because there was a standing order out there. If you don't turn him over, you're no friend of the state of Israel, Jerusalem, the Jews.
So the 30 pieces of silver didn't have much to do with it?
Say again?
The 30 pieces of silver didn't have much to do with it?
I think there are probably several reasons. Maybe in as much, you know how people rationalize things in your mind? Maybe this is one of those factors? I seriously doubt this was the main motivator for it, but nonetheless, some people even think that Judas might have had really good intentions. He was trying to force Jesus into a position where he would have to come out and declare himself as king. And that's what a lot of his followers really believe. Maybe I'm not really swayed by that one either, but maybe that's part of it. Chapter 12, we've got a few more minutes here, but before we get into chapter 12, any comments on the 11th chapter here? What are the take-homes from the 11th chapter? That whole thing with Lazarus and the opposition that Jesus faces. I know there's probably dozens of take-homes. Is there one that jumps out at you as far as, wow, after reading a story like that? I don't know. I think often, after reading a story like that, I think to myself, how could I be so stupid? Sometimes some of the evidence is just overwhelming.
I wonder if that's where that saying came, quiet down and wake up the dead.
I have no idea, but I'm pretty confident that Jesus is the only one who could do that. That's good.
Mark,
Yes.
I've heard of someone for our ministry give a sermon on the part, where he tells them to unwrap them. They compared it to baptism. When you come about baptism, that you need someone to help you, grow.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Many are the times that the Bible uses the metaphor of a child growing, babes in Christ, and what is it, Hebrews chapter 5 and chapter 6, about how you need milk instead of solid food and grow it. And I think most of us would realize that a baby, you just can't leave him on a table and expect him to be okay by himself. The younger you are, the more you need help. That would kind of go with the very thought that you're saying there. Good. Okay, chapter 12, let's get a couple verses into this. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. I think this first verse here is just connecting our thought, because he paused a little bit to tell us what's going on behind the scenes with the high council, right? So he's kind of regrouping and telling us that he's come for the Passover to Bethany, and this is Mary, Martha, and Lazarus again. Now, if this is right after, I can't imagine, I just can't imagine what they're going to be feeling like, but I can well imagine them wanting to throw a big meal for Jesus. That makes sense. I told you before, didn't I? There's a lady named Ruth. I'd have to go back and look this up, but Ruth received notification from the army at the beginning of Desert Storm, came and visited her and said, we're so sorry to inform you that your son lost his life in defense of the country. And they notify people personally, and she received that notification. 3 days later, Army came back and said, we misidentified his body. He didn't die. Your son's alive, and we're sending him home. And every time I read that story, I'm thinking and they interviewed her, and she said for 3 days, she was beside herself. But after 3 days, and it's interesting that 3 days later, that after 3 days, she said she felt like doing cartwheels. She felt like, go buy whatever you want, life's all starting again. Well, that's probably the way Mary, Martha, all the close friends felt about Lazarus. He was dead, and he's back. So they're going to have this time with Jesus. He comes, and it says, so they made him a supper there, and Martha was serving. That's no surprise, is it? Martha's serving, but Lazarus was one of them reclining at the table with him. Why are they pointing out the fact that Lazarus is there at the table?
Hey, maybe he's hungry.
Alive.
Can't eat for 4 days.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I just point this out because it does seem a touch unusual that they would point it out. Maybe not. Maybe you don't find this surprising at all. Maybe it's just they're emphasizing they're all there and Lazarus is there. But a little bit later on in the story, we're going to find out that a lot of people are gawkers. And they're coming around just to see, where is that guy? Point him out to me. Is that the guy? See the guy who was dead? And the religious leaders, we're going to find out, have put a hit on him. And so maybe Lazarus has been laying low. Not dead, but just not in the public eye, not associating with other people when large groups of people are around. But on this occasion, Jesus is here. He's going to be part of the festivities. He's there. One of them reclining at the table. I'm going to leave it at this. That reclining at the table. Good translation. And please remember this when we come up to the Passover meal and the Lord's Supper and everything else. They didn't have chairs. Sometimes they would have cushions. Sometimes the table would be elevated from the floor. Sometimes they wouldn't even use a table, but sometimes the table would be elevated from the floor, but it would be much lower than the kind of tables we're talking about. Depending on how large the party is, as best we can tell, the Last Supper, the tables would have been in a horseshoe shape, or University of Miami, for those of you who prefer. But when you picture it that way in your mind, people, instead of sitting at the table, reclined at the table. If this table were only this high off the floor, and you had a cushion to put your left arm on, and your legs would go out behind you like this, and you'd lean on your left arm, and there would be a table just off the ground. That way, you always ate with your right hand, right? Right? Okay, you always ate with your right hand. That was the public hand. That's the hand you would use things. So when you have it seated like this, and if people are around the table like this, doesn't it make sense when it said Jesus leaned over into whose chest? John's. Remember this? When he's at the table, it's like, how could he lean? Why is he leaning? Because if you're all seated like leaning like this, it just makes sense to. He's more flexible than I'll ever be, I'm quite sure, but nonetheless, leaning like that. Okay, it also makes sense in a setting like this, because for Mary to come around and anoint his feet would have been sticking out from the table anyway. So she's not interrupting anything, but in a sense, she's really interrupting for all the right reasons. So we'll stop right there. Any other insights or questions or?